You that are viewing this on the YouTube, you do not have this, but you can get this from me in class. This is a document-based question that was offered by the College Board as an example of what you might see on the AP test that you are going to take in May. Now, about 1/4 of the grade that you get on that test will be your response to this question, right? Not this question that you see here, but one that's like it. So I want to read the whole page to you. So read along with me, and let's read the whole page together. There will be one document-based question on the exam. The document-based question will have one of the following historical thinking skills as the main focus: causation, change in continuity over time, comparison, interpretation, or periodization. All document-based questions will also assess the historical thinking skills of historical argument, appropriate use of relative historical evidence, contextualization, and synthesis. For the sample question shown below, the main historical thinking skill being assessed is continuity and change over time. The learning objective addressed is peopling, PEO-3. The direction to the students will explain the discrete tasks necessary to score well on the question. So now, that part you would not see on the test. But what you would see on the test is the directions. Directions. Question 1 is based on the accompanying documents. The documents have been edited for the purpose of this exercise. You are advised to spend 15 minutes planning and 45 minutes writing your essay. Now, basically they're saying that you have 1 hour to respond to your document-based question. Right now, I'm not sure how the test is organized, because this is the first administration of the test in this format. But, what they're suggesting is to plan on an hour. 15 minutes to think and 45 minutes to write. Your responses on the line pages that follow the question, write your responses on the line pages that follow the question. Your response should do the following: state a relevant thesis that directly addresses all parts of the question. I'm very confident in most of your ability to do that. Throughout the year, we've written papers, and as far as addressing the question with a relevant thesis, most of you have been fairly competent in doing that. Support the thesis or relevant argument with evidence from all or all but one of the documents. So they are saying that when you get this document-based question, you should use all of the documents or all but one of the documents. That we didn't do. We wrote in class a document-based essay at the midterm, right? We didn't insist that you use all the documents. You did a take-home document-based exercise on the West, and most recently a take-home document-based essay on the 20s. Now, in those 2 that you took home, you clearly used all the documents because you picked them. But in this one, they want you to incorporate all or all but one of the documents. Focus your analysis on each document. Focus your analysis of each document on at least one of the following: intended audience, purpose, historical context, and/or point of view. Support your argument with analysis of historical examples outside the documents, which means that in any document-based question, they are looking for you to incorporate things that are not there. Right? Now, connect historical phenomena relevant to your argument to broader events or processes. Synthesize the elements above into a persuasive essay. Here's the question. Analyze major changes and continuities in the social and economic experiences of African Americans who migrated from the rural South to urban areas in the North in the period 1910 to 1930. So, that's the question. Now, if we're looking in that question, it says, analyze the major changes and continuities in social and economic experiences. What do we mean by social? When we say, and you'll see this on questions, social. I mean, what's that mean? So the continuity and change in terms of social experiences, yes.
Like how, like, in society, how, like,
So if somebody's in society, what's happening?
how they're being treated.
Well, I think in a broader sense, how being treated is true. But in a broader sense, in society means your interactions with other people in society. So your interactions with other people in society is what's social, right? I mean, if somebody says that you are too social, what do they mean?
You interact.
That's right. You interact too much, right? You're too social, right? Marissa, they never say that of you, do they? No. You're too social. You interact too much. So it's your interactions with others. Typically, one of the biggest things under the category of social is status and class, right? So how do you interact with other people? Well, to some extent, it depends upon your status or class or position in society, right? So what's your position in society? Are you upper class? Are you working class? Are you underclass? Are you impoverished class? Now, do we have class distinctions in the United States? Well, we kind of think that we don't have class distinctions in the United States. And what we said differentiated the British American colonies and the eventual United States from Europe was that we did not have hereditary class distinctions. In other words, no one was born naturally or better than anybody else by virtue of their birth. But there were emerging class distinctions, you know, either on the basis of accumulated wealth, inherited wealth, you know, but typically the class distinctions in America had differences, and frankly gender, right? I mean, what's another class distinction? Well, if you were a woman in colonial America, you obviously had a different class distinction than a man. Race, right? You know, if you were black and enslaved, a different class distinction. Immigration, if you were an immigrant versus a native born, maybe you had a different class distinction. So all of those things would be fodder for kind of social continuity or social change. How about economic? We say economic experience. What's that refer to? So we say economic, we say social refers to interactions between people. What does economics refer to? Go ahead, Charlie. Yeah, I think trade and business are examples of economics, but I think, McKenna, when we talk about economics, we talk about how people meet their material needs. So what are economic issues? Economic issues are issues of how people meet their material needs, how they get the goods and services they need to survive. So clearly, work, farming, property ownership, money, all of these things are economic issues. So if we're looking at this question, here's what we know. We know that between 1910 and 1930, African Americans migrated from the south to the north in large numbers. This is in fact called the Great Migration. It's the Great Migration of African Americans. So, we know at the end of the Civil War, 85 to 90% of all black people lived in former slave states. We know that that was true all through the Gilded Age. The overwhelming majority of African Americans remained in states that had previously had slavery. We know that. We also know that the great movement of African American people out of the South into northern cities occurs during this time period, and very much more specifically in 1917 when World War I starts. So, okay, now what's the question? For these people, what changed and what stayed the same? Right? What changed and what stayed the same? Now, when you are responding to an essay question, whether it's on the AP test or whether you go to Harvard University in 2 years and take history there, you cannot do enough dissecting of the question. So, do you see how nicely we did this? I mean, we did this together, sort of. where we dissect the question. So now we know, what's this all about? What we've got to write about is how things stayed the same and how things changed for the people who left the South and went to the North. Right? Now let's say we knew nothing. Right? I mean, that's possible. It's possible. We know nothing. But here's the thing. We might know nothing, but we have the documents. So let's just take a look at the first document, just for fun. It's a short one, right? Document 1. Right, so document 1. The source is Southern African American Folk Sayings, 1910. The white man, he got half the crop. The boll weevil, he took the nest. Ain't got no home, ain't got no home. Now, I'm going to work hard to figure out how to incorporate something, but what's that talking about that might be relevant to our question? We talked about it. And I want you to write this next thing, yes. No, it's economic. It's economic, but what did we talk about? Now, let's go back. When we, in my view, and I don't know where I want to go back to, but let's just for this point go back to the end of the Civil War. So what's the significance of the end of the Civil War for African Americans? Well, the significance of the end of the Civil War for African Americans is A, the Emancipation Proclamation, which is going to liberate a significant amount of slaves, but more importantly maybe than the Emancipation Proclamation is what? In liberating anybody that's enslaved. Not just the people who were in rebellious territory, which was the Emancipation Proclamation. What formally ends slavery as the war's ending? Go ahead, dear Stephanie.
Is it the 13th?
It is indeed the 13th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes slavery illegal, ends the discussion, right? Slavery is over. Now, with slavery ending, and the overwhelming majority of ex-slaves living in former slave states, 4 million of them in particular, who we called the freedmen, the question was, one of the big questions after the Civil War was, what would be the status and condition of these people? Now, we know this, that this is the source of great controversy, right? White Southerners want jurisdiction over the condition, the status and condition of their freed slaves. They want to manipulate them as laborers. They want to control their circumstances. They want to establish their status, and they believe that it's their right. Now, what reflected best, now think back, what best reflected the white Southern attitude about the status and condition of their former slaves in the aftermath of the war? I'm going to be so happy when you get this, Marissa. It's going to be rewarding as a teacher.
Plessy versus
No. That's a good one, though.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Could you give me one of those packets?
Oh, that was so deflating. I thought he was going to come up with an insightful answer, and what did he do? Could you give me one of those back? McKenna, I'm deflated now. Sylvia, I'm deflated. Now, when I say that, you're going to say, ah. How about the black codes? Right? You still don't know. You remember that now? The black codes? Remember Lincoln is assassinated and Johnson takes over Reconstruction with that kind of lenient presidential Reconstruction program that gives the southern states, the former Confederate states, great latitude in kind of dealing with the ex-slaves. And what does every single ex-Confederate state do? Pass the black codes. What did the black codes do? Relegated those slaves, those former slaves, to positions of inferiority and some level of servitude in those states. Now, in response to the black codes, right, remember that the North kind of rejects those. And then there is that titanic struggle between Congress and President Johnson about Reconstruction, which eventually ends with Congress taking over the process of Reconstruction and implementing this period of radical Reconstruction. It is a 10-year period. It starts in 1867 and it lasts until 1877. Tell me anything you remember about radical or congressional Reconstruction. Remember, what happened is Congress threw out everything Lincoln and Johnson did and said, we're going to start over and we're going to reconstruct the governments of the ex-Confederate states. Tell me anything you remember about that Reconstruction. Anything at all. Doesn't even have to do with African Americans. Anything. Somebody has to make my day like that they actually were paying attention. Stephanie, you can do this for me.
Was there like a 10% plan or something?
Well, the 10% plan was thrown out as a result of radical Reconstruction. I'll take it. I'll take that. That's, at least it's in the ballpark. What do you remember about this? Remember, I harped on this. You know, with the kids, Marissa, you don't think the kids were texting when I was doing this, do you? You know how they like to do that. Now, you can text, you're not in our class, feel free. But some of the other kids, while we're talking, they're texting. It's all very important. But Sylvia, what do you recall? Ellis's head was bobbing on you probably about that. He was going like this about that time. Go ahead. 67 to 77. Status of conditions of African Americans in the ex-Confederate states. What do you remember? Anything at all? Yeah, go, Charlie. Yes, what were those people that went down to help them out called? What was that organization that was formed? The Freedmen's Bureau, right? The Freedmen's Bureau. So the Freedmen's Bureau was there, and they tried to help, you know, African Americans incorporate into the larger society. But the most important thing about this period of what we call radical congressional Reconstruction is those ex-Confederate states were forced to enfranchise African American males. African American males were enfranchised to vote, hold office, and participate in government. Did they? Did they do that in those ex-Confederate states during that period? Yes, they did. They did. They held office. There were, you know, black senators, black members of Congress, black officials that were elected on the local level. And they had these governments in those states that were coalitions of former slaves, the freedmen, carpetbaggers, and scallywags. Who were the carpetbaggers? Anybody remember that? The carpetbaggers. Anybody? Go ahead, Alex. Well, no, the carpetbaggers were northerners who came to the south to participate in this. The scallywags were southerners that supported it, and the former slaves were just what we said, the former slaves. They are the ones that formed the governments in the south, that attempted to have Republican regimes that would protect and ensure the rights of African Americans and incorporate them into society as pretty much equal citizens. What amendment to the Constitution ensured that African Americans would have equal citizenship and equal protection under the law? Go ahead, Marissa.
14.
Yes, there we go. There we go, the 14th Amendment, which was passed in 66, right, the 14th Amendment. Now, the white South is going to resist radical Reconstruction. What was the symbol of white resistance? Yeah, you got it. The Ku Klux Klan. So the purpose of the Ku Klux Klan that forms during this time period is to restore white rule, redeem white rule. So they considered the radical regimes as black rule. Right? Now, so how are we going to do this? We are going to intimidate, vigilante, terrorize. The Ku Klux Klan was basically a terrorist organization that attempted to terrorize the people that were in power to get them out of power and to redeem white rule. Now, by 1877, white rule was redeemed. So we say, look, that's the end of radical Reconstruction. 1877. What was the event that ends it? Somebody's going to get this. I know somebody's going to get this. Somebody is going to get this. Marissa, you already got one. You feel like you've done your duty, don't you? Yeah, now you're looking at Stephanie and Sylvia. What are you two going to do? Alex, he's got one too. Yusuf, We need you now. I know you don't speak, but you're going to have to break it. You have to break your silence. What was the end of it? It was called the Compromise of 77, yes. Yeah, Charlie. Go ahead. Go ahead. Was the election of 76, right? The Compromise of 77 was the agreement that Hayes would take the presidency in exchange for him withdrawing troops from the South. So when he withdraws troops from the South, all of the former Confederate governments fall back under white rule. Now, we said after 1877, the overwhelming majority of African Americans are living in the ex-Confederate states. And we said three things were going to be true for them. One, they were going to be politically disenfranchised. What does that mean? Now, you actually don't have to remember anything for this. What does that mean? Politically, I mean, talk down to might have been part of it, that they were basically disenfranchised, meaning that they no longer voted. They no longer had the vote or any kind of political influence. And in the United States, the biggest political influence common folk have is voting. Now, African Americans were politically disenfranchised starting in 1877, culminating around the turn of the century. How? How did the white South prevent black people? Because remember, during the Civil War era, 3 constitutional amendments were passed. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The 14th Amendment made the slaves citizens and guaranteed them equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment gave the right to black males. So, black males have the right to vote under the 15th Amendment, but they're not voting. How did that happen? Yes. They scared them off. Now tell me one way they did it. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Didn't they like make them pay a thousand taxes?
A poll tax? Yes, yes, go ahead. Well, I mean, there was lynchings and killings, but the poll tax, the literacy test, oh, here come some of our friends. Take this, take this. Now, where were you guys at now? What was...
Where was that?
Wheeling. Take this to my enemy, Sean Wheeling. Yes. The poll tax, literacy test, the grandfather clause, these are all ways that the white South is going to, and Charlie used the word intimidate, and intimidation is part of it, but basically black males are no longer going to vote, and black females, no females could vote until 1920. And we mentioned that, look, when we talked about the modern civil rights movement the other day, in 1954, you know, part of the modern civil rights movement that Martin Luther King is going to be the central champion of is involving enfranchising African Americans in the South, empowering them politically. So now we're back to 77, right? So we fought the Civil War, we freed the slaves, we had three constitutional amendments, right? We are working on the question at the bottom of that page. We have those constitutional amendments, and now we're establishing the context of continuity and change. So we're saying in the aftermath of the war, right, African Americans are politically disenfranchised. They are economically dependent. We did these 3 things. How did we define economic dependence? So we said 3 things about black people after the Civil War. 1, most of them, well, more than 3 things. 1, most of them remained in ex-Confederate states. 2, many of them were politically disenfranchised. 3, many of them were economically dependent. How so? What did we identify? Somebody's going to get this, yes. It was an agricultural system that's reflected in document 1. Yes? Sharecropping. Right, now look at document 1. Right? Document 1 says, Southern African American folk song, the white man, he got half the crop. That's sharecropping. Remember, the deal was that black families would be allowed to cultivate former plantations, plots and former plantations, as rent. What did they pay? A share of the crop. So what does this African-American song say? The white man, he got half the crop. Now, okay, so right off the bat, what's relevant to this question? Sharecropping. Is that continuity or is that change? We don't know yet, but it took me a long time to get there. But we got there. We got to the first document. Now let's just quickly go to the second one. Letter from a prospective African-American migrant. New Orleans, so this person is in the South. It is 4/27/17. What happened? No one will ever get this. I mean, I don't, but what happened on 4/2/17? No, 4/4/17. Maybe it was 4/2. No, 4/2/17. No, 4/2/17. Go. It's really easy.
Was there election?
No, World War I started, right? World War I started on 4/2. So this is days after World War I starts, right? Dear sirs, being desirous of leaving the South for the betterment of my condition generally, and seeking a home somewhere in Chicago or some other prosperous town, I am at sea about the best place to locate having a family dependent upon me for support. I am informed by the Chicago Defender, a very valuable paper which has for its purpose the uplifting of my race, and of which I am a constant reader and real lover, that you were in a position to show some light to one in my condition. Seeking a northern home. If this is true, kindly inform me by mail, by mail, the best thing to do, being a poor man with a family to care for. I am coming not to live on flowery beds of ease, for I am a man who works and wish to make the best I can out of life, and I do not wish to come there hoodwinked, not to know where to go or what to do. So I solicit your help in this matter, thanking you in advance for what your advice may be. Please to give me. I am yours for success. So, okay, what's he doing? What is this person doing? Go ahead, Charlie.
He's writing a letter about it.
Yes, and he wants to leave the South, New Orleans, to go to the North for what? A better life. Is that continuity or change? Now think about, obviously, for that one. The change is that most of the African American people lived in the ex-Confederate States and were sharecroppers. What's this guy want to do? He wants to go to Chicago. Why? For a better life. So the flagrant change is that African Americans saw opportunities in the North for a better life. And where did he find out about those opportunities? What does he say? Where does he find out about it? The Chicago Defender, a black newspaper. So a black newspaper is advertising to African Americans that there are opportunities in the North, and he wants to go there. Is this continuity or change? What's change, right? Let's just do one more. It's hard work, McKenna. It's hard work to get the things out of the kids. Let's do one more.
Wait,
I'm so happy right now. This is happy's new life. Go ahead, Marissa.
Well, you said that was change, right?
Yes.
Well, couldn't it be considered continuity?
How so?
Because they're kind of like always saying there's no opportunity in the South, and always opportunity.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can say that.
Uh-huh.
That's a good notion. That it's an indication that the opportunities in the South are limited to sharecropping, so therefore, you know, I want to go north. That's good thinking, right? Okay, let's go to 3. Dwight Thomas Farnham, Northern White Efficiency Expert. Article entitled, Negroes as a Source of Industrial Labor, Industrial Management, August 1918. A certain amount of segregation is necessary in times to preserve the peace. I'm not even going to read further. A certain amount of segregation is necessary to preserve the peace. Now, okay, remember we said a minute ago that there were three things, right? Three things that characterized African Americans. One, after 77, political disenfranchisement, right? Two, economic dependency, sharecropping. Three, social segregation, right? Social segregation. What laws, McKenna, you're getting this. What laws do we associate with the segregated South? I'm so happy. Jim Crow laws. It was these, here you go. Take one of these up for the other vicars too. It was Jim Crow laws. Right? So Jim Crows were the laws that socially segregated African Americans from white people. Now, is segregation a social issue? Absolutely, right? It's a social issue. So that's part of what we're looking for, these social issues here. So we know in the aftermath of the end of radical Reconstruction, and by 1900, most of the ex-Confederate states were officially, socially, legally segregated, right? All right. What Supreme Court decision constitutionalized that segregation? Yes. Yes. Bussey versus Sylvia, we got one. Bussey versus, we're going to say that. We're going to say that. Bussey versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Now we did do that the last review session, right? So that segregation. Now, okay, so the South is segregated, correct? By law. What's the first statement in document 3 say? Yes, go ahead. A little segregation is necessary to keep the peace. Continuity or change? Continuity, right? Now think about it. Marissa, take a look. Can you get a change out of it? I mean, you did a good job on the last one. But if you read the whole thing, we're thinking continuity or change, right? Well, I mean, clearly this guy is saying that, look, in these northern factories, it's good to segregate the black and white workers. And in the South, there was legal segregation. So does segregation continue? Continuity, right? Now, I mean, so, okay, so we go through these documents and you know, the idea here is to work through these documents, think about continuity, think about change, and then after we've thought about it, construct an introductory paragraph or a thesis paragraph that takes a position. And the position would be something to the effect that, you know, between 1910 and 1930, socially and economically, there were major areas where there was continuity, but also areas of change. Now, you might divide it by, you know, picking one for each, right? You know, that way. A big area of continuity would be in the area of social interactions, discrimination, right? And then you could talk about, you know, discrimination in the South and in the North and how that continued. Then you might say an area of major change was in economic opportunity. And you could talk about sharecropping as opposed to working in industrial factories. Now, if you can incorporate other things that you know, which based on our conversation seems fairly unlikely, right, then that's what they're asking you to do, as well as these documents. Right? Now, another thing about this, in terms of African Americans, a big theme in American history and for the AP test is identity, right? Now, identity is kind of two things. If you think about it, your identity has two aspects. Who do you think you are, and who do other people think you are, right? So who do you think you are, and who do other people think you are? I think I'm a really nice guy, personally. I don't know what I don't know, you subscribe, say no. You talk about, you know, so, I mean, who do I think I am? Who do you think I am? Is my identity. So when we think of the country, what do Americans think about America? What do others think about America? What does America think about America? What do the parts of America think about America? So when we talk about African Americans and African American identity, which is a part of identity, the larger theme, who do black people think they are, and who do others think they are throughout American history, right? And you get a sense of that by just our conversation, right? I mean, I think in terms of African American history, you know, if we are going to categorize it or periodize it, you know, you have a period of time in American history where black people are brought to America or migrate to America, and their status is unestablished. In the very earliest kind of time period when black people were either brought to America or migrated to America, their status was uncertain. Now, I mean, we have kind of this notion that they came here as slaves, but we know this: the first black people that came to the colonies came to Jamestown in 1619, and their status was unestablished. Were they indentured servants like other indentured servants? Were they slaves? We also know that after that period, a scant few African Americans migrated or were imported here. That slavery isn't going to take hold in colonial America until later in the 1670s, and the real huge influx of actual slaves, imported slaves to America that are recognized as chattel slaves, is not going to happen until 1700, right? And between 1700 and 1818, there is going to be a significant importation of slaves, about 400,000. Now, in terms of the history of slavery, almost inconsequential. You know, in the whole history of slavery, which is hotly debated, the number of people who are apprehended in Africa against their will and transported into various places as slaves, you know, the estimates range into the millions. But the evidence in the United States is pretty conclusive that it was only about 400,000. Now, if you think about 400,000, by the end of the Civil War, you're talking about liberating 4 million slaves, right? So the 400,000 turned into 4 million plus because there was a significant free black population. Now, okay, one event that I want to mention in kind of the history of, you know, when we're talking about African Americans and the Great Migration, you know, and that kind of question there, and we did a little background on that, you know, and we went back to the Civil War. Now we're going back to the initial migration of black people and saying that it takes some time for this notion of chattel slavery. When I say chattel slavery, what do I mean by that? You know, we say that there was chattel slavery in America. Yes. That's right. What Charlie said is slavery of you and your children, right? Now, throughout human history, there had been slavery. So you win the war, you enslave the people, right? You know, so you take over these people, you enslave them. But their children were generally not slaves for life. And on the basis of skin color. I mean, that's what eventually emerges in the Western Hemisphere. That Africans are enslaved for life and on the basis of skin color. And their status becomes transferred from child to mother. So, think about why that was true. So, okay, if your mother was a slave, you were a slave. In the past, the connection was father to child. Now, in America, all the laws and all the colonies in the States establish the mother. If the mother is a slave, then the child is a slave. Why was that true? Why did that have to be true? Yes?
Is it because the masters were like having...
Yes. The masters would impregnate their slave women. If the father's freedom transferred to the slave children, then all those children would be free. So in order to continue that, they had to define it through the mother, right? I mean, it's terrible. Obviously that's terrible, but I mean, that's why, right? And so, but an event, I want to get this event in before we conclude, is something called Bacon's Rebellion. Now, let's think back. This is early in the year when you kids were actually interested, right? Early in the year, we're talking about colonial America, right? And we mentioned something called Bacon's Rebellion, and we actually talked about it in the context of slavery. Does anybody remember anything about Bacon's Rebellion? Go ahead, Charlie. Not slaves. Not slaves, yes. It was an uprising. What state? What colony? No states. Virginia. You're a genius. People don't recognize it. They don't realize it. They don't recognize it, and they should. You're a genius. It was in Virginia. What else, Marissa?
I don't know. I think I had the wrong spelling.
I knew this happiest moment of my life. Right up until this point, this happiest moment. Birth of my children and you responding to this question. Go ahead. What did she say? I want to be happy. Yes. Now I'm really happy. It was a rebellion of poor farmers, former indentured servants that tried to, does overrun the colonial government of Virginia. They are frustrated with a colonial aristocracy that, what was the source of it? Do you remember? Yes. Well, it was taxes, it was an inavailability of land, an unavailability of land, because that's why they all went there, the former indentured servants, and dealing with the Native Americans. Remember, they wanted the colonial government to go out and fight the Indians so that they could have more land, and the Governor Berkeley wouldn't do it. And so eventually Bacon's Rebellion is crushed. Bacon dies of swamp fever. The rebels, in some cases, are executed and prospered, and colonial government reestablishes power in Virginia, in the colony of Virginia. What the heck does this have to do with slavery? We talked about it in context of slavery, and we said that this is very important to the establishment of an identity of Africans as what? Slaves, right? As slaves. The identity of Africans as slaves. What does this have to do with slavery? Does anybody remember besides it? We can, now we're getting somewhere. Go ahead.
Didn't you say because it's based on the rebellion that it would encourage them to rebel also?
What's that?
That it would encourage the slaves to rebel?
Yeah, I mean, Bacon is, I just read this today, that Bacon invited the slaves to join in this rebellion against the aristocracy. But in the aftermath, what transpires as far as labor in colonial Virginia? The plantation owners that need labor to cultivate tobacco. Up until Bacon's Rebellion and around this time, what was the primary source of labor? Yes? Indentured servants, which were white indentured servants, Europeans that sold themselves to slavery for the assurance of future land. If there isn't land available, then these former indentured servants might rise up again like they did in Bacon's Rebellion and insist on some kind of redistribution of the land that is available. But who is going to make a more controllable labor force? Slaves. So in the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion, we can see a shifting in colonial Virginia from white indentured servants to African slaves. However, right? However, African slavery as a viable economic kind of institution is going to suffer with the crop that slaves cultivate. What was the main crop? Up until 1793, the main crop, the main activity that field hand slaves participated was the cultivation of what? Not cotton, tobacco. Why did I use 1793 as a transitionary date? Cotton gin, right? How does the cotton gin change the dynamics of slavery? Yes?
You can now use short staple cotton.
Oh, everybody knows that from Wheeling, the short staple cotton. So now you can grow short staple cotton efficiently, process it with the cotton gin. Where did they grow short staple cotton? In Virginia? No. In Maryland? No. Where did they grow short staple cotton? In the Deep South. So that's where the slaves went, right? How'd they get there? The Virginians and the Marylanders and the North Carolinians and the Delawareans and all of the people that had slaves that were less than economically viable started to sell those slaves to the Deep South, sell them down the river. I mean, that's where that adage comes from, sold them down the river. And so on some level, again, and this is dirty, I mean, I know that, on some level the Northern South became involved in slave breeding, and the Southern South became, involved in slave exploitation. And because of the importance of cotton as a cash crop, we said that Americans in the South are going to begin to defend slavery as a positive good. Now, one last thing, and I promise you we'll conclude with this. Just for fun, this thing that I gave you, and I'll give you this, you'll see it. This thing, this appendix, scoring appendix, the rubric for the essay that you would write off of that is right here. I gave it to most of you guys. It's 2 pages in there. Just take the top page and the second page, when you leave, right? So that's there. Now, the other thing I wanted you to point out to you is if you look at the 10 documents to remember, right? If you look at the 10 documents to remember, one of the ones I chose was William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator. Why did I pick it in the context of what we've been talking about? So we're talking about continuity and change with slavery, African American identity. Why would I pick the Liberator? And why would that be relevant to the conversation that we're having? My goodness, this question is going to go out into cyberspace on YouTube. Teachers all over the world will be stealing it. It's such a wonderful question. Yes?
I was going to say, let's usually like that help people gun the cause to
What was the cause? The Liberator, we argue, launches a cause. What was the cause? My heart's warm.
So, Booker T. Washington, he says, don't attack, just work hard, you'll get your freedom. And he says, no, we need our freedom, so we're going to fight for it, right?
That was a little later. That was a little later. I don't want to discourage you, but it was a little later. Washington and Du Bois are the 20th century. Go ahead, Sylvia. No? What's the cause that the Liberator represents? No? Go ahead, Alex. What's that? Abolition. The immediate emancipation of slaves. The radical abolition movement. Now, once Africans are enslaved, right? I mean, that's okay. I mean, it's not okay. But it's okay as long as your society is stratified. But if you claim that all men are created equal, and you revolt on that basis, then slavery becomes inconsistent with that claim, right? And once America was established, there was an incongruency between the notion of America and the reality of slavery. But it takes until 1830 for someone to say, hey, look, slavery is wrong, and it should be abolished immediately, and the people participating in it shouldn't be compensated for it, and the slaves that are freed don't have to be recolonized. So prior to that, there was a general, I don't want to say a consensus, but kind of a notion that was prevalent that slavery was wrong and bad. But the question was, how do you get rid of it? And the response was fairly conservative until Garrison comes along and says, yeah, just end it. And you don't compensate the people, and the African Americans don't have to go back to Africa. The radical abolition movement is what kind of leads to the Civil War in some ways. Right? All right. I know that I've exhausted your attention. I know that. And I thank you for attending, and we eventually got Well, we have our friend that made it the whole time, and she's not even in our class. We got 10. It's better than nothing. I got you two, you and Alex and Yusuf for the last 2 meetings.